Здравейте, здравейте, муци и моми, аз съм GMR, а това би трябвало да е епизод 8 от поредицата ми на Dragon Age Origin. Продължавам от там, откъдето бяхме стигнали, само че този път сме се върнали в кемпа, вместо да ни е крашнало.
Look at what your fool dog placed in my pack. A putrid, half-eaten hare is not something a woman wants to find in her unmentionables.
It's the thought that counts. He means well.
The dirty mongrel can have this back. There. And tell him not to do it again.
Ще му кажем, че е Warlock. Няма да го гледаме прекалено много. Дай да ги погледаме.
You are a true warrior and worthy of respect.
It's going to take some time, you know. Да видим дали ще да... Не. Да ни изкопае нещо. Явно няма нищо да ни изкопае. Добре, за сега оставаме на мира и отиваме да си поговорим с Алистър, Лилиана. Така ще ги подкараме.
What do you need? Ask away.
Сега, проблема е, че не си спомням минали път докъде си говорихме с тях.
Such as they are.
Добре, ще кажем, че този път ще си говорим с Алистър за Грей ордените. Мисля, че си говорих до някъде с него, но не съм сигурен дали ги изговорихме всичките неща. Where the nearest Grey Wardens from there.
That's a good question. There's plenty
from
in
here,
Orlais, but who knows where they might be found. And the nearest Orlesian city is weeks away. If we go north and cross the sea, there's bound to be some in the free marches. Again, however, I just don't know where. I don't know anything about Grey Wardens in other lands.
Проблемът е, че нещата ми звучат познати поради проста причина, че съм играл играта много пъти. И сега ще видим дали всъщност като си говорим с тях тези възможности да ги изговорим на много изчезваха. Имам някакъв бейл спомен, че някои изчезват, някои обаче не. Сега да видим. Is there a headquarters somewhere?
Here in Ferelden, there's our compound in Denerim at the palace, but that's it. Loghain will have control over that and be watching it, no doubt. Beyond that, the only place I know of is Weishaupt Fortress. That's the headquarters of all Grey Wardens in the Anderfelds, 1,000 miles from here. But I've no idea how to even contact them. So unless we try to get back to the compound in Denerim, I suppose the answer is no. There's nowhere for us to go.
So, what happens now? That there's just two of us.
I imagine that eventually the Grey Wardens outside of Ferelden will wonder what's happened. Why there's no contact from Duncan or someone. They'll send someone eventually. Though who knows what Loghain's people in Denerim will tell them. Maybe they won't send anyone. We could try to contact them. But that would mean leaving Ferelden, and even if we did, they couldn't come back with us in time to stop the Blight. So that means whatever happens, it's up to us.
We will need to start rebuilding the order.
I mean, Eventually, we would have to use the joining to make more Grey Wardens, right? But I don't know how to do the joining, or what's involved. I know it involves lyrium and some other magic, and that it's really difficult to prepare, but that's it. Unless we can find out more about the joining, I guess we better get used to the idea that there might only be two of us for now. Until more come from elsewhere.
Окей, добре. What would happen if we just left?
Just left? You mean just left Ferelden?
Право целия свят,
don't
бат, се
know.
стреляме с ракета.
If there's an archdemon, however, we're supposed to be the only ones who can defeat it. And that means the blight would grow unchecked. Eventually, other Grey Wardens in Orlais and other lands would hear about it, and they would come to fight it, but they wouldn't come in time to save Ferelden. There's no way. I'm not going anywhere.
I have
About
no
the
more
Grey
question.
Wardens, anyhow. Fair enough. What do you need? Ask away.
Няма ви сега.
Such as they are.
Добре,
About
значи си
the Grey
изчерпвали.
Wardens, anyhow. Fair enough.
Просто това е
What do
добре.
you need? Ask away.
So, how do you become a Grey Warden?
Same way you did. You drink some blood, you choke on it, and pass out. You haven't forgotten already, have you?
Haha, very funny.
I do my best. What can I say? Let's see. I was in the Chantry before. I trained for many years to become a Templar, in fact. That's where I learned most of my skills.
You don't seem like the religious sort.
You're telling me I was banished to the kitchens to scour the pots more times than I can count. And that's a lot. I can count pretty high. The Grand Cleric didn't want to let me go. Duncan was forced to conscript me.
Поне да
Was
отвесе
she
Батко.
ever furious when he did? I thought she was going to have us both arrested. I was lucky.
You think this is better than being a Templar?
Oh, I suppose the Chantry life is good enough for some. Here, we have the chance to fight against the Blight. To actually do some good instead of sitting in a temple somewhere. I'll always be thankful to Duncan for recruiting me. If it hadn't been for him, you know, I wouldn't have.
Не знам дали е бил добър човек, затова ще кажа I shouldn't have brought him up.
No, it's... I'm sorry. I shouldn't be... It's fine.
В смисъл, познаваме Дънкън от
He died a
един ден, братче, два.
They all did. Come on, let's go. I think I'm done talking.
Но изключваме това, че сме били
What do you
припаднали.
need? Ask away.
So, you said this Earl Aemon raised you.
Oh, did I say that? I meant that dogs raised me. Giant slobbering dogs from the Anderfells. A whole pack of them, in fact.
Really, that must have been tough for them.
Well, they were flying dogs, you see. Surprisingly strict parents, too. And devout Andrastians to boot.
And this dog saw you to Chantry. I take it.
Oh, there you go, listening to me again. You'd think you'd have gotten past that already. I ended up in the Chantry, sure, but I didn't start there. Let's see, how do I explain this? I'm a bastard. And before you make any smart comments, I mean the fatherless kind. My mother was a serving girl in Redcliffe Castle who died when I was very young. Arleman wasn't my father, but he took me in anyhow and put a roof over my head. He was good to me, and he didn't have to be. I respect the man, and I don't blame him anymore for sending me off to the Chantry once I was old enough.
Why did he send you off to the Chantry?
Arleman eventually married a young woman from Orlais, which caused all sorts of problems between him and the king because it was so soon after the war. But he loved her. Anyhow, then you, Arlessa, resented the rumors which pegged me as his bastard. They weren't true, but of course they existed. The owl didn't care, but she did. So off I was packed to the nearest monastery at age 10, just as well. The Arlessa made sure the castle wasn't a home to me by that point. She despised me.
Тя си мислила, че си мусина е такова. Wasn't it inappropriate for the Earl to raise orphan?
Probably. It was just a kindness he did to a woman who had served him anyway. I didn't sleep on silk sheets in the keep or anything. I remember I had an amulet with Andraste's holy symbol on it. The only thing I had of my mother's. I was so furious at being sent away, I tore it off and threw it at the wall and it shattered. Stupid, stupid thing to do. The owl came by the monastery a few times to see how I was, but I was stubborn. I hated it there and blamed him for everything. And eventually, he just stopped coming.
Yes,
I'm quite sure. At any rate, I don't look anything like him. You'll see for yourself. Not that it stopped the rumors any. All I know is that the Owl is a good man and well loved by the people. He also was King Kaelin's uncle, so he has a personal motivation to see Loghain pay for what he did. Anyway, that's really all there is to the story.
Само ако знаеш, брат, но ще разбереш след време.
Yes? Something you need? Yes?
Искам да си поговорим.
What's on your mind?
Do you miss anything about Orlais?
I miss Val Royeaux. Unlike other cities where the people are the lifeblood and the character, Val Royeaux was her own person, and her people little more than decorations. There was always music in Val Royeaux, streaming from the many windows, quiet refrains and triumphant choruses, and always, floating above that all, the chant, coming from the Grand Cathedral. It was magnificent.
It sounds wonderful.
Oh, it would take me a day or two to talk about the many splendors of Orlais, her golden fields, her lush meadows. Of course there are good things and bad things about Orlais, like anywhere else. Sometimes I miss it dearly, and sometimes I'm glad I'm rid of it. And you will laugh at this, but I miss the fine things I had in Orlais.
What sort of things?
Dresses, fine dresses and furs. And shoes, of course. One can't mingle with nobility with bad shoes, you see. Orlais is very fashionable, almost ridiculously so. But the shoes! Living with those ridiculous trends was worth it for the shoes.
What's so special about shoes?
Well, they're shoes. They're pretty. Some of them anyway. When I left Orlais, the fashion was shoes with delicate tapered heels and embellishments in the front. A ribbon, perhaps, or embroidery. In soft colors, of course. It was spring.
That sounds so lovely.
I had my eye on a pair my shoemaker was working on. It was covered in pale blue silk with amber beads on the toe. The shoes made in Orlais were exquisite. Not at all like these clunky fur-lined leather boots you have in Ferelden. Ugh, just look at them.
Тя спря да говори. You don't need fancy shoes to make you beautiful. Сваляч.
It's kind of you to say so, even wearing these mud-covered horrors. They're sturdy shoes, but sometimes a girl just wants to have pretty feet. Oh, I could talk about shoes all day, but we have things to do, don't we?
Да.
Yes? Something you need? Yes? What's on your mind?
О, това с историките, мисля, че беше доста дългичко. Първо ще минем надолу. I heard that in Orly Orley. Minstrels are often spies.
Where did you hear this?
I read it in a history book.
And did you not think that this could be historical fact and no longer true?
Nope.
Not all minstrels are spies. Most are just singers and storytellers. But some of them are what we call bards.
And the birds are spies.
Bards are minstrels and more. Spies, as you say. Some say there is a bard order, but I don't think this is true. Many bards work alone or in small groups, doing the bidding of a patron who pays for their services. If there is an organization behind it all, no one knows who they are.
Patrons. Patron. What sort of patron?
Nobles mostly. In Orlais, there is much rivalry amongst the highborn. They fight over land, influence, and the favor of the empress. But they cannot do this openly because it is impolite, and in public, they wear smiling faces and pretend to be civil. In secret, they plot and scheme to destroy each other. It is a game completely meaningless to anyone but its players.
You're a bard, aren't you?
I have revealed too much,
Надушила.
it seems. But it doesn't matter what I used to be. It is the past.
Сега ние това може да питаме, но знаем, че няма да може да научи. But why were you living AFC сестри in rural Ferelden? Rural. Това трябва да проверя какво е.
Found myself in Ferelden and sheltered from bad weather in the Chantry. And when the storm passed, I just did not want to leave. I like to see the maker brought me here.
Секундичко, обаче искам да разбера
Yes?
какво е това
Something you need?
rural. Предполагам, че нещо от сорта на западнал, третостепенен или второстепенен, нещо с това значение. Проблемът е, че нещо не намира. Освен нещо свързано с португалците, но затова сега няма да... Затова сега няма да продължавам да търся, после ще си проверя. Така, за да не губим много време. Can you teach me to be a bard?
I don't think you have the correct aptitude. I could give you some pointers, though. You may be able to pass them on to someone you know. Let's just go over there, away from the others. For safety, yes? I expect there shall be daggers flying about willy-nilly for a time.
О, това е яко. Така учихме специализации, после можехме да изучаваме хората на тях.
Yes? What's on your mind?
You're traveling. You were a traveling minstrel. Do you have tales to share?
Of course I do. I love stories far too much to keep them to myself. Everyone should be able to benefit from them, I think.
Добре. Tell me about Darkspawns.
Chantry law says it is man's pride that created the Darkspawn. In ages past, the mages of the Tevinder Imperium ruled much of the world we know. In their pride, they thought their magics invincible and imagined that they were greater than the Maker himself. So thinking, they invaded his golden city, planning to take it for themselves and depose their own creator. But they were impure and full of sin. and it is with the sin that it tainted the golden city, corrupting it forever. The Maker cursed them and cast them from his sight. Wherever they went, they spread the taint of their sin. Any land that was touched by the taint became blighted and would suffer no life. Instead, the Darkspawn arose to torment us and remind us of our hubris.
В общи линии това е историята, с която започва играта. No, any stories from Orlais?
Of course, Orlesians enjoy telling stories. I shall tell you my favorite tale of Aveline, the Knight of Orlais.
Go ahead.
A long time ago, a girl child was born to a farmer. He had hoped for a son, not a daughter, and so he told his wife to abandon the child in the woods. Before the cold could claim her, the baby was found by a tribe of Dalish elves who took pity on the poor mewling thing and raised her as their own. Aveline, for that is what they called her, grew strong and quick and clever under the guidance of the elves. She learned to wield the sword as well as any man, could kill a deer with an arrow at 100 paces, and was as graceful on the back of a horse as she was on foot. Aveline's Dalish guardians saw that she could easily best any Orlesian chevalier in battle, and wanted to show the cruel humans the child they had left to die. They bestowed upon her a fine horse and armor, and sent her to prove herself to her people in the grand tourney. Now in those days, no woman was allowed to take up arms, let alone compete in the grand tourney, but Aveline kept her helmet on and was not discovered. Aveline won many events and gained the approval of the adoring crowd. Eventually, she came face to face with the knight Kaleva in the grand melee. Aveline had already bested him in the jousts, and Kaleva was determined not to lose a second time. Out of desperation to regain his honor, Kaleva tripped Aveline and tossed her to the ground, ripping off her helmet as he did so. Silence fell upon the arena as Aveline was revealed. Kaleva declared the previous competitions invalid. A woman had taken part, and this was not allowed. But the crowd cheered for Aveline. Kaleva was furious, for he had lost to a woman and was now being shamed. Blinded by his rage, he forced Aveline to her knees. "Know your place, woman," cried he, and slit her throat.
I was hoping for a happy
The son of
ending.
the king, Prince Freyan, was present. He recognized Aveline's skill and bravery and began to see the injustice done to the women in his land. When he was made king, he rewrote the laws of Orlais so that women could also become chevalier. He honored Aveline and knighted her after her death. And to this day, any female who is knighted reveres Aveline the Brave, for she is the patron of all women chevalier.
Do you know any Ferelden legends?
I know one, told to me by my mother a long time ago. It always chilled me to the bone. Maybe you have heard of Flemeth?
I met Flemeth in the Cockery Wilds.
Are you sure? Was she the Flemeth of legend?
Прощайте.
Flemeth, the devourer of men. Flemeth, mother of witches. Flemeth, demon-touched, who dwells in the mists.
Да. She didn't really introduce herself as such. What does it matter?
Ferelden mothers scare their daughters with talk of Flemeth. They say that if you're bad, Flemeth will spirit you away and bind you to her forever. They also say that
Значи
Flemeth
Моригана
warns her
била
of beauty
лоша,
and will
затова
steal
тя
yours
не те
through
взела.
your looking glass if she catches you.
That was once beautiful.
Flemeth's beauty was known throughout the land. She had hair like unto a moonless night, skin as pale as winter's first snow, and eyes as beautiful and perilous as the sea. When she came of age, she came to the attention of the Lord of Highever, Conobar, and he took her for his wife. Conobar soon learned that his young bride had the gift of magic. He kept this a secret, for he feared that she would be taken from him. Flemeth stayed with Conobar for some years, and with his blessing, she practiced her art. And then one day, a young poet named Osen came to the castle. Flemeth was captivated by Osen's voice, and he by her beauty, and they fell in love. Flemeth longed to be with her true love, and she and Osen fled from Conobar's lands, seeking refuge in the Kokari wilds with the Chasen tribes. They lived there happily for many a year, till the day Flemeth received news that Conobar was dying and longed to see her face one last time. Flemeth's heart swelled with pity for the man who once was her husband, and begged Osen to return to Conobar's side with her. But when Flemeth and Osen entered Hayeva, they were captured by Conobar's men, and Osen was slain in front of Flemeth's eyes. Flemeth was imprisoned in the highest tower of the castle, there to await Conobar's judgment on her. Distraught at the loss of her love, Flemeth plotted revenge against her husband. She summoned a fey demon, intending for it to wreak vengeance on Conobar. But a spell went awry. The demon possessed Flemeth. Turning her into an abomination, the halls of the castle ran red with blood as Flemeth slaughtered Conobar and all his men. The last of Flemeth's humanity melted away, and at dawn, she stole back to the wilds to plot and scheme for 100 years. They say she took to her side many chastened men, and with their help, begat her daughter witches, who even now prowl the dark places of the Kokari wilds.
Добре, до някъде може да се каже, че е прав.
Which one?
Do you know anything about Delish?
I have heard a little about how the elves gained their freedom from the Tevinter Imperium. When Andraste began her exalted march against the Imperium, the elves joined her cause to fight their masters. The great elven leader, Shatan, born in captivity, rose up to lead his people. He foresaw a future where the elves were free. Shatan was killed when Andraste was betrayed, but the elves continued to fight, eventually breaking free of the Imperium. The elves claimed the dales in the south and settled there in the land of their own. The elves lived in the dales for centuries. They resurrected the worship of the elven gods and would allow the building of no chantry. This angered the chantry, and the hostility between the two factions finally broke out in open war. The chantry says the elves struck first, but I do not know whether to believe it. The chantry declared a wholly exalted march against the elves, named for Andraste's similar march against Tevinter. During the exalted march of the Dales, the elven cities were sacked, and the elven state completely dissolved. Some of the elves bitterly accepted their fates and surrendered to human rule, living in the human cities as second-class citizens. But others, still fiercely proud of their heritage, refused to bow to the humans, and instead became homeless wanderers. They were the elves of the Dales, the Dalish.
Аз мисля да разпитаме за всичко направо днеска.
Andraste was the Maker's chosen. The Maker had long since abandoned the world when the sound of her singing turned his ear. Beauty, grace, and wisdom enraptured him, and he offered to take her from this flawed world to become his divine bride. But Andraste had an earthly husband and would not forsake him. Instead, she beseeched the Maker to return to his people once more. So earnest was her plea that the Maker was moved and promised that he would create a paradise on earth if all abandoned their false gods and turned once more to him. And this is why Andraste began her exalted march on the idolaters of the Tevinter Imperium. The Maker granted her his powers with which to smite her enemies. Andraste brought the Imperium to its knees, and her victories converted many to the worship of the Maker.
Добре, супер. How did Andraste die?
Alas, It was the
знае.
frailties of men that betrayed and killed Andraste. Her earthly husband, Mafarath, a chieftain of the Alamari tribes himself, grew jealous as his wife's popularity and influence overshadowed his own. She was also revered as the Maker's betrothed, and Mafarath began to see their own bond waning in significance as Andraste became ever more devoted to the Maker. Out of envy and spite, Mafarath made a pact with the Archon Hessarian of Tevinter, allowing his beloved Andraste to be ambushed and captured. Andraste was burned at the stake in Minrathus, the capital of Tevinter.
But the winter has a chantry, doesn't it?
The Tevinter chantry claims that in Andraste's last moments, Hessarian's heart softened, and he heard the voice of the Maker telling him to end her suffering. He plunged his sword into her heart, and as her blood washed over his hands, he became one of the faithful. Dissenters said that the Archon only converted because he could not stem the tide of Andraste's cult, and was forced to do so to stay in power. We will never know for sure.
Така, мисля, че приключихме с историите, което е супер. Съответно вече няма какво да си говорим след. Между другото на Ляна сложихме този арбалет. Тъй като... Що си клекнам тук, бе, бата? Тъй като се оказа, че... мисля, че мога да я ресетна скиловете. Обаче се оказа, че може с мод. Чак в Awakening експанжена се вкарва книгата за ресет на таланти. И тъй като нея вече си развили доста стабилна част от скиловете за от скиловете на арчерито, реших, що пък не, в крайна сметка. Нека бъде стрелец. Така, I have a question. Мисля, че няма какво да си кажем с него. I want to discuss something you mentioned. И тук няма какво да си кажем, което е супер. Това ще ни спести доста приказки. Okay, quick save.
What do you wish of me?
I'd like to ask you something.
If you must.
Сега не си спомням тук дали я питахме дали може да стане.
I cannot teach you, no. But any other mages that cared to learn, yes, I could do that. Send whoever you wish my way, and I shall teach them what I can in the camp, provided they possess the will to even make the attempt.
Така, супер, вече можем да правим шейпшифтери. Искам да те питам нещо. Did you grow up in the Kokori wilds?
Why do you ask me such questions? I do not probe you for pointless information, do I?
You can probe me anytime.
Beg pardon then while I jump for joy. What is it you asked if I grew up in the wilds? A curious question. Where else would you picture me? For many years it was simply Flemeth and I. The wilds and its creatures were more real to me than Flemeth's tales of the world of man. In time I grew curious. I left the wilds to explore what lay beyond, never for long. Brief forays into a civilized wilderness.
And you remained
For
unnoticed.
the most part, Flemeth taught me well. For all that I had been taught, however, the truth of the civilized lands proved to be overwhelming. I was unfamiliar with so much. So confident and bold was I, yet there was much that Flemeth could never have prepared me for.
Понаместиме малко. Were you hurt? Very daring. That sounds like you.
Equal parts daring and foolhardy, perhaps. Only once was I accused of being a witch of the wilds, and that by a chastened who happened to be travelling with a merchant caravan. He pointed and gasped and began shouting in his strange language, and most assumed he was casting some curse upon me. I acted the terrified girl, and naturally, he was arrested.
No, that's quite... that was quick thinking.
Men are always willing to believe two things about a woman.
Da.
One, that she is weak, and two, that she finds him attractive. I played the weakling and battered my eyelashes at the captain of the guard. Child's play. The point being that I was able to move through human lands fairly easily. Whatever humans think a witch of the wild looks like, 'tis not I. Not that I did not have trouble. There are things about human society which have always puzzled me, such as the touching. Why all the touching for a simple greeting?
Touching? Like a handshake?
To begin with, yes. What is the point of touching my hand? I find it an offensive intrusion. There were many nuances that Flemeth could never tell me of. When to look into another's eyes. How to eat at a table. How to bargain without offending. None of these things I knew. I still do not understand it all, truth be told, but then I gave up long ago any hope of doing so. When I returned to the wilds last, I swore to Flemeth that I had no intention of leaving again.
Yet here you are.
Yes, here I am. Well, let's get on with it before the ground opens up and swallows us, yes? Yes?
Така,
If you must.
искам да питам нещо. Have you ever been hunted by a gentry?
You are very cute to ask so many questions.
And you're good.
Really? Perhaps we should be wrapped in ribbons and adorned with flowers. So cute are we, too. My mother has been hunted from time to time, yes, by Templar fools like Alistair, which should tell you how successful they generally were. Flemeth made a bit of a game of it, in fact. The Templars would come again, and she would look at me and smile and say that the fun was to begin once more.
You really had no trouble with them?
I am unsure. I was too young to understand, and perhaps 'twas bravado on Flemeth's part, or perhaps she was merely amused. I will never know. Flemeth would warn them once. 'Twas a warning they inevitably failed to heed. And then the true game began. Often Flemeth would use me as bait, a little girl to scream and run and lure the Templars deeper into the wilds and to their doom.
Flemeth used you as a bait?
'Twas a game, and I a young girl. If I didn't get to play, I would have been very upset. Thankfully, the wilds is a vast place. Once they found us, Flemeth would simply move us elsewhere, and we would be lost within the forest once again. I did not understand the danger we faced until I was much older. I had never heard of apostates or maleficarum.
Don't you regret hunting any of those men?
Would they have regretted hurting me? I was a young child. Yet do you think they would not have gleefully held my head aloft as a trophy? There are no trials for apostates, no prisons, no mercy. There are only absolutes, so only survival matters. If the wilds have taught me anything, 'tis this. First, you must survive. Do you disagree?
Не мога да не се съгласиме, но Vacation, така, you're probably right. Absolutely, you're probably right.
An enlightened view, or at least an agreeable
Все
one.
пак трябва да е
Enough
смея.
of this talk. Let us return to the task at hand.
Shit. Това даже ни е взело една точка надолу.
Yes?
Така, после ще
If you
питаме
must.
за... Is Flamet really what she seems to be?
Well, that depends, does it not? What does she seem to be?
A powerful modifier.
You mean, is she truly the Flemeth of legend and story?
Yep.
Tell me, how much do you know of the tale? The one that the chastened still tell of my mother, to frighten them into obedience.
I heard a little bit.
No doubt such a tale has mutated much over time and telling. I can relay what Flemeth once told me herself, and you can decide whether or not 'tis the truth, if you desire.
Това звучи супер, да.
As the tale is sung by the bards, there was a time when Flemeth was young and beautiful.
Добре.
A fair lass in a land of barbarian men, the desire of any who saw her. Many centuries before this land was even named Ferelden. The tales say that Flemeth fell in love with Osen the bard and fled the castle of her husband, the dread Lord Conabar, and that he swore vengeance for her infidelity. In truth, my mother claims that 'twas Osen who was her husband, and Conabar the jealous lord who looked on from afar. Lord Conabar approached young Osen and offered him wealth and power in exchange for his lovely wife, and Osen agreed. The life of a bard is a poor one, and love fades in the wake of hunger. 'Twas Flemeth who suggested the arrangement. All would have been well had Lord Conabar kept his end of the bargain. But he was a foul man who bargained with coin he did not possess. Osen was led off to a field and slain, left for dead. Flemeth spoke to the spirits and learned of the deed, and swore revenge.
Малко да покихнем. But wasn't she now married the wealthier man?
That was not the point. Conabar had no honor, so she would not have him. Flemeth begged the spirits to aid her, and 'twas they who slew Conabar. The demon the legend tells of came later. Lord Conabar's allies chased Flemeth, you see, chased her to the wilds, and there she hid. There she found the demon, and he made her strong. The legends all speak of the great hero Cormac, he who defeated Flemeth and her great army when she invaded the lowlands centuries later. All lies.
Which she never defeated, or she never defeated her?
The truth of the
Because
matter
he
is
never
that there was
defeated.
never an invasion. As Flemeth tells it, the Chastened never raised an army under her banner, and she never fought with any warrior named Cormac. Cormac led a brutal civil war against his own people, and later claimed it was to vanquish evil that had taken root amongst the lords. Thus, he was hailed a hero. Flemeth was only attached to the legend much later. Perhaps 'twas due to the great war with the Chastened that eventually came, but Mother claims not to know how it began.
The legend tells of Flemeth having many daughters.
You ask if I have sisters. I have asked of this myself. The stories tell of many witches of the wilds after all, not just the one. And these tales existed long before I did. Flemeth refuses to speak of other daughters, if they existed. So, should I believe I am her first? I doubt that too.
Добре. Значи най-вероятно имаш някъде другаде сестрички. Aren't abomination usually insane horrors?
How often is this usually? Always? If not always, then when is it not true? There are more things in this world and the next than you or I could ever hope to understand. What Flemeth became is a mystery. I suspect even to her.
How is that Flemeth has survived for so long?
The demon within her has transformed her into something else. An abomination, perhaps some would say. I know not. I only know my mother is clever, and she is part of the wilds as it is part of her. But she is no immortal. She bleeds. A blade in her heart would kill her like any other, were it lucky enough to find her.
Ще видим, ще видим. Do you believe her version?
I do not believe everything that Flemeth claims. Oft it seems her bitterness has coloured her memories. But on the whole, yes, I believe this tale, if not all.
An interesting story. Thank you.
Flemeth tells it with far more embellishment than I, but you are welcome. Dare I ask of your own mother? Few are abominations of legend, 'tis true, but I find myself curious nevertheless.
Няма да лесен, нали? In fact.
Then you have my sympathies for what it is worth. Which is very little, I am certain. It matters not. Let us move on.
Така. Получихме много ability и трябва да видим после какво ще прави то. Бързо quick сейвче. Би трябвало вече да сме изговорили всичко с нея. Yep.
Yes?
So, life in the wilds must have been very lonely.
At times, perhaps. A world
Sem
full
направим
of
закачка.
people and buildings and things was all very foreign to me. If I wished companionship, I ran with the wolves and flew with the birds. If I spoke, 'twas to the trees.
And did they speak back?
Don't be foolish. I recall the first time I crept beyond the edge of the wilds. I did so in animal form, remaining in the shadows and watching these strange townsfolk from afar. I happened upon a noblewoman by her carriage, adorned in sparkling garments the likes of which I had never before seen. I was dazzled. This, to me, seemed what true wealth and beauty must be. I snuck up behind her and stole a hand mirror from the carriage. 'Twas encrusted in gold and crystalline gemstones, and I hugged it to my chest with delight as I sped back to the wilds.
I can't imagine Flemeth was pleased.
She was not. Flemeth was furious with me. I was a child and had not yet come into my full power, and I had risked discovery for the sake of a pretty bauble. To teach me a lesson, Flemeth took the mirror and smashed it upon the ground. I was heartbroken.
But you're just a child.
And a foolish one. Flemeth was right to break me of my fascination. Beauty and love are fleeting and have no meaning. Survival has meaning. Power has meaning. Without those lessons, I would not be here today, as difficult as they might have been.
But you don't need to live that way any longer.
Do I not? I am still an apostate mage, even if I have left the wilds. The Darkspawn are yet undefeated. No, there is much that remains. To return to your original question, perhaps my time in the wilds was indeed lonely, but such was how it had to be. I find myself at times wondering what might have become of the girl with the beautiful golden mirror, but such fantasies have no place in mixed reality.
Само трябва да пиеш от бокала.
Yes?
Добре, свършихме с приказките. Така, да видим какъв скил ни се отключи на Мориган. Къде си, Мориганко? Мориганко, Мориганко. Така. Малък бонус на Magic. Добре. Добре, обаче тук ще сложим край на епизода. Ще видим къде ще ходим в следващия епизод. Пожелавам ви всичко най-хубаво. Чао, чао и до нови срещи!